Sponsored today by Acronym. I guess I'm not saying anything compelling enough to cause you people to look at me and listen to me. Some program highlights. Don't forget the après-ski, after skiing, this afternoon at 4 in the Troll Howland Lounge. It's over in the other sector of this building, and sponsored by Bing. The cocktail party tonight will be right under here, I think. Is that true? Right, it's this same area, but down a level. Boy, I got total quiet when I mentioned the cocktail party tonight. Down under this level. And then we get on, we go right out the doors, board buses, and we go up to the Empire Canyon Lodge at the top of a beautiful mountain in the snow, and we have the fireside dinner, sponsored by Yahoo. But that's all for later. Now we're going to hear over lunch from, excuse me, I'm talking here. We're going to over lunch hear from Mike Green. He's the CMO and Managing Director of Acronym, and he actually can almost lay claim to having invented search marketing, because he was there certainly at the beginning. And we're delighted to have him come and talk to us. Acronym has been sponsoring our summits for the last 18 months or so. We appreciate their support. And Mike, by the way, I normally give a speech. I'm sorry, but I think people get tired of my speeches by the time much has happened here. But normally I talk about the dangers of altitude sickness. If some of you are feeling a little under the weather, it could be the altitude. And you need to drink a lot of water, cut down on your alcohol, even though we're throwing all these parties at you. And if you're really bad, you can get medicine, which I've just given some to Mike because he's a little under the weather. And so I'm sure he's going to give you a good presentation anyhow, but give him a little bit of leeway for the fact that he's suffering a bit from the altitude. Here's Mike Green.
Thank you very much, Ken. I do appreciate it. How are you feeling, guys? I feel like shit, seriously. Just thought we'd get it out there. I should start by way of an apology for the slight technical problem that we're having with this particular microphone. It's a strange intermittent problem, and every now and again, for some unknown reason, it can make you sound as though you have a British accent. It's doing it now, isn't it? I've been doing that gag for 15 years at every conference, seriously. It works a treat all over the world, except London, England. Never goes down there. So I am the CMO Managing Director of Acronym. Very proud of that. I've been in the industry for a very long time. I'm also very proud of the fact that I'm chairman of SAMPO, which is the Search Marketing Professional Organization. How many people in the room are members of SAMPO? That's good to see. You guys who put up your hands should be very proud of yourselves. The people who didn't, you should be ashamed of yourselves. You will finish your lunch, go to your room, and not come out until you're members. And you're banned from the cocktail party, all right? So my office is in New York City, as you can tell by my native Brooklyn accent, and I did bring a New York cold with me. That's actually the view from the window in my office. I took that with my iPhone, that is the actual view. And it is so fabulous on a clear day you can see so far, but every now and again, something comes along to ruin the view. You would. If your office was in the Empire State Building, totally, you would just do that. Seriously. So, I've been around for 21 years in the industry, as Ken says, and I've seen a lot of changes. There were only a few guys. In fact, there was probably me, a guy called Danny Sullivan, and maybe there's a couple of other guys who were involved in doing this stuff with search engines. It wasn't even called search engine optimization. It didn't even have a name back then. And When I first started working with the guys over at Google, there were about 30 people there. They've got like 60,000 now. This picture that you can see on the right-hand side, I'm very proud of. I took that picture way back in the day when Google was just getting off the ground, because when Google hit the scene, as it were, they were perceived to be the most advanced search engine ever invented. And guys, that's it. I took a picture of it. Can you imagine back in 1999? And if you take a close look, it's handmade and it's all corkboard. That was Google way back in the day. My, haven't they changed? So every year since they went public, the founders, Larry and Sergey, have always come up with this founder's letter. But this year they decided to give it to Sundar, to the new CEO. And it's interesting if you read that there. When Larry and Sergey founded Google in 1998, there were about 300 million people online. By and large, they were sitting in a chair, logging onto a desktop machine, typing searches on a big keyboard connected to a big, bulky monitor. But today, that number is around 3 billion people, many of them searching for information on tiny devices they carry with them wherever they go. 3 billion people carrying around these little devices, tablets. No wonder things have changed. Things have changed dramatically for Google. This is one of the many data centers around the planet. If you've never seen one, that's what they look like. So they've come a long way since the corkboard days. Way back in the day, I met a guy called Brian Pinkerton, who was the developer of the world's first full-text retrieval search engine. It was called Web Crawler, and he was actually part of the team that helped to build out Google. And I was talking to him, because I was writing the first book on SEO, believe it or not, 18 years ago. And I was talking to him about the problems that they were having. And I said, crawling the web and bringing in these millions and millions of pages must be a really difficult job. He said, that's difficult, but we're scaling with it. He said, but there is something that's much more difficult than that. And I said, what is that? He said, imagine, Mike, if you owned a little store on the high street, you're like a tour operator, and somebody opened the door and they just said, travel, and then shut the door. What would you do? He said, this is the problem that we have. It's understanding the end user, understanding the query, trying to understand the intent behind the query. And this is something that I'd never discussed before. When you use those words, what did you actually mean? And he told me this little story. He said that when Victor Hugo, who wrote this fabulous book that became the play, that became the musical, that became the movie, blah, 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 when the book was published, he wasn't actually living in Paris at the time. He was living in the country. And when the book was published, he wanted to know whether it was a success or not. So that postcard at the top is the card that he sent to his publisher in Paris with just a question mark on it. And then when his publisher received it, he knew exactly what it meant, and he sent the other card back with just the exclamation point. And because the two guys knew each other, they fully understood the intent. Basically, Victor Hugo was saying, is my book successful? And his publisher was saying, yes, it's a huge success. I thought it was a great little story. Feel free to use it at the next cocktail party. I would like a credit for it. It is actually regarded as the world's shortest conversation. So that's when I started looking at intent and trying to understand what the heck is intent all about. Intent has been around for a very long time. It's a state of mind. It's about a belief, desire, a goal. It's been studied in philosophy and psychology. But if you look around now, you can see that there is a lot of work going on in digital marketing, trying to get to understand a little bit more about intent. And that communication between Victor Hugo and his publisher is the same kind of thing that's going on between the end user and the machine now. IBM's doing some astounding work on what they're calling cognition computing. And this is about forging an understanding between the person and the machine, specifically understanding more about intent. So I met this guy many, many years ago. He wrote this seminal paper called A Taxonomy of Web Search. He was the chief scientist at Alta Vista, which was around before Google. He's now distinguished scientist at Google. And I was very fortunate to meet him, and he explained to me how he had taken all of these millions and millions of keywords and broken them down into a taxonomy where you could understand the intent. And he broke it down into these three specific areas: informational, navigational, and transactional. And since I discovered that 18 years ago, every client that I've worked with, I've said, if you understand the intent behind specific keywords and phrases and create a content experience specifically for that, not just something that's relevant, but a content experience, then you will have a much more successful campaign. This is Avinash Kaushik. He and I have been very close personal friends for a very, very long time. I know many people in the room will know Avinash. He and I went on a world tour once, actually, a few years ago. And we've talked about intent on so many occasions, about trying to get people to understand that everybody is at the transactional stage. We're always trying to meet people at the transactional stage when you could have a relationship that starts much earlier. And he explained to me a couple of years ago, I was actually at Google, I was doing a promo video with him, and I did an interview. And I just managed to, with the camera still rolling, I said, do you mind if I just keep this for the audio, and we'll just chat about what you're doing next. And he explained to me how he had taken basically the taxonomy of search and created this new kind of idea, a simpler idea of looking at it, which he simply calls See, Think, Do. It's a framework based around understanding intent. And of course, he says everybody's trying to meet each other at the do point. That's where everybody's spending money in paid search, that's for sure. But imagine if you could meet somebody at the see stage, and you had content at the think stage, and then you would have that kind of brand affinity that begins much earlier on. If you go to acronym.com, the video is actually on the homepage. It's a shitty website. We're in the course of creating a brand new one. But there is a little video there if you want to know more, because he does a much better job of explaining the way that he's adapted the framework. He's actually added something else to it. He's added care. So it now goes See, Think, Do, Care. That was a very important move for him, but also for the fact that STD was never a very good acronym for his framework. So I've written a lot of papers. You can go around online and find them, writing about understanding intent, particularly now with mobile and understanding context. And Google has become really good at understanding the intent behind a query, but not just that. Now understanding more about the end user behavior, end user data is becoming so much more important. So query expansion techniques they've been doing for years. You know, at one point in time, if you search for fish tank, you would see a fish tank. Now you search for fish tank, you'll see tropical fish aquarium, blah, 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 and everything else that goes with it. Query chains is a really important one. I haven't got time to explain the whole thing here, but if you want to catch me later on, if I don't faint or fall over or anything, and we can chat about that. But this is much more about machine learning, understanding what it is that we're searching for, and going through that cognitive process that starts at the see and going right through to the do, and then being able to preempt that. There are so many times now that you'll see, if you do a search at Google, and you look at the results and you go, wow, that's exactly what I was looking for. Google is saying, but it's not what you asked for, because the words that you use don't actually appear in the content. So there's probably been a lot of talk about machine learning here. It's something that I've been studying for a while, because Google was into it at a very early stage with support vector machines. There's a big cultural change that's taking place at Google now. So the guys that started in the information retrieval field, mainly responsible for the organic side of the business, are getting pushed out by the new guys coming in, the learners. These are the guys that do all of the machine learning. And it is a big cultural change, so that they're kind of doing a bit of both at the moment. But Amit Singhal, who was the head of search there, left the company recently. He scaled it as far as possible, as far as human beings can take it, when everything is rules-based. But now the machine guys, the learner guys, are coming in, and of course with machine learning, it's actually the data that is driving the data that is driving the data, that black box. In certain areas, it means that we get much better results. In other areas, it's pretty bad. But at the end of the day, it means that the machines are now programming the machines. It sounds scary, but it's actually pretty interesting. So the technology at Google is changing dramatically. Digital is changing dramatically. But the end user is also changing. The customer is changing, and the way that we consume media is entirely different to the way that we've ever done it before. So this notion that we've had before about this purchase funnel that every marketer in the world has seen was a linear journey that really doesn't exist anymore. There is no linear journey. And actually, if you take a look at most of the major publications now, all of them saying, you know, that the traditional purchase funnel is kaput, it's gone. And that's mainly because understanding intent and the way that we consume media, we can come in at any stage. If you look at that final sentence, they often jump stages, stay in a stage indefinitely, or move back and forth between them. There are plenty of studies that are out there, probably even more that are more recent than this one, but again, that final sentence there, new shopping paths are emergent depending on, and these are the words, behavior, device, location, and intent. And these are the areas that we need to start and focus on, particularly when it comes down to search. One area that I always have heated debates with, given that I was classically trained as a marketer and came through broadcast media, I was print, TV, radio, the whole thing. And I find that with search now and understanding intent, I have to unlearn a lot of what it is that I was taught in the first place, like reach, frequency, and even demographics. If you look at the little video that I mentioned before with Avinash explaining the difference about targeting a demographic group and understanding the power of intent. And that's the only time I've heard a sentence that had the words iPad and wheelchair. But it's worth listening to it. If we stick with demographics, many occasions we're going to actually miss the sale and not get the sale. Part of the problem, I do believe, is that we have to start and think about this as being more personal. We take those 60-year-old methods and methodologies, those metrics that were meant for an audience, they're audience figures. There is no actual audience, and this is a very interesting conversation. I don't know how many people in the room know anybody who said, you know, tonight I think I'll just go back, kick back in the lazy boy and watch the internet for a few hours. Nobody watches the internet. You interact with the internet during the course of the day, and you interact with it on a very personal basis. And I think, again, I had this conversation recently. I was at Google just last month on some stuff that I'm doing with the Think with Google team, and they were talking about this. We do use the term audience, but perhaps it's the wrong thing to do. I'm watching you guys now tweeting and doing that. There's nobody looking over your shoulder. This is a very personal experience, and yet when I look at copy and I look at the way that as marketers in marketing communications, we're still talking to they and them and these groups out there when this is actually a very personal experience. So I do think we have to change the dialogue that we're having. And that's why, obviously, you'll have seen this with Google, all of these particular moments that come around. We've stopped at our agency looking at creating a persona. We think about life moments and what happens in that moment, and do we create a content experience? Not just content that's relevant, but relevant and useful, and that's the different thing. These are the key moments that people go through. You'll have seen them before. The numbers have probably changed. If you go to Google, to Think with Google, they're always updating them over there. But that's what we've started doing. And I wrote this column for Think with Google earlier this year about an agency perspective, and it was just based around this one thing that I realized, that when we received an RFP, we were actually including in our response strategically and tactically how we would be looking for these kind of life moments, why these were really important. And a lot of the clients that we were talking to were beginning to realize that even though people were talking about this, it was never actually part of, this is the strategy that we would use if we're working with you. I kind of pulled this out of a training deck from one of the clients that we were working with, one of the guys in the office, just to show this point. This is Scott's Miracle Grow, a client that we've been working with, and even though that sounds dull, they're really, really cool to work with. They're very advanced and adventurous. And when we started talking about not just always tackling people at the do end, at the transaction, trying to meet people at the checkout, let's start and talk about the C. And let's create a life moment. And what we did was just talk about, this guy has bought a new house. It's barbecue season, and he's going to present the world's best barbecue. He's going to really show off to all of his friends. So he sneaked out to the Home Depot and he bought the new grill. He's got the hat and the apron and the tools, the whole thing. And then he comes out to do the barbecue and the grass just looks like shit. It's terrible. It was the last thing that he thought about. So what we talked about to the client was saying, do you know, if you guys owned the playbook on how to prepare for the world's best barbecue, lawn care would be a part of that. And it's completely changed the way that we think about developing content, thinking about that content experience. And when you think about the content experience, it just has to be useful. Instead of creating content for the sake of creating content, just think about how useful can that be in the moment. That is the most important thing. Understand the intent and then think about the experience that you need to go with it. I was talking to the SEO team an acronym, and about most of the work that they're doing now, and asking, just going back to where I started, where I came in 21 years ago, where we were talking about meta tags and H1 tags and all of this kind of on-page stuff with SEO. Does it still exist? I'm not going to say that it's not there. It's got nowhere near the kind of power that it had before, particularly with the new methods that Google is using in machine learning. But what we are doing is spending more time in using the technology that we've developed to do content gap analysis and work with our clients, because one of the things that we discovered with Scott's was that they were really underrepresented in content in certain areas. At the do stage, they had plenty, nothing at the see stage, nothing at the think stage. And then we were able to do content mapping and then develop the content around that. So I think most of what our guys are doing now is about content experience. What is the content experience if I was to come into the website at this stage, but even if I was to come into your app at this particular point, or if this was on a smartphone, if it was on a desktop, or if it was on a tablet, what would that experience be? Do the content gap analysis and then develop the content understanding the intent. And this is the little gift that I got from Google. Basically, if you can read the quote from there, they sent that to me. It sits on my desk. I'm very pleased that they took the gray out of my hair. It's a very good likeness. And basically, they've used that quote many times before. You can try and meet everybody at the do stage. If you try and meet everybody at the transactional stage, then you will just be slugging it out. But imagine if you were able to create those content experiences so much earlier on to gain that brand affinity, and then to begin to develop that dialogue. It'll be so much easier when you do get to the checkout. And that's it, guys. I made it and didn't faint. Thank you very much for your time.
And you didn't pass out.
I didn't.
All right, good stuff. Any questions for Mr. Greeham while we have him here, while we have him still upright? I suspect you'll be hitting the either hot tub or just closing the drapes and shutting her down.
Whatever he said, just get that illusion straight out of your minds.
All right. Do you have a colleague that's here as well, right?
Yeah. My Michael Brew. Where is he? He's
Michael.
There
Michael's a veteran. Hey, you're a veteran of this show. Hey, Michael, how you doing?
Yeah.
All right. So grab Michael, the two Michaels, and answer any questions. Any questions right now? We probably want to get outside and have some
stunned you
fun.
all into silence.
All right. Well, grab these guys if you have
you,
questions.
guys.
Thank you very much. Big round of applause again for Mike.